under the dazzling city lights. Amelia stood before the gilded gates of an opulent gala, an event she had never imagined attending. In her hand was an elegantly crafted invitation. Yet the scrutinizing eyes of the guards and elite guests swept over her with thinly veiled disdain. "Mississippi, this is a private event. No entry without an invitation." The guard's voice was firm, almost dismissive. Amelia held out her invitation. But instead of acknowledgement, she was met with soft, mocking laughter. A woman in a crimson gown smirked. "Are you sure you didn't find that in a dumpster?" Amelia tightened her grip on the invitation. She was here because she had been invited, but by whom? And why? Whispers spread as the guard inspected the card. A brief moment of hesitation. Then he reluctantly stepped aside, allowing her through. No one knew that the moment Amelia crossed that threshold, the night would take an unexpected turn. And those who had laughed at her tonight would soon regret it. Amelia Carter had never been invited to anything glamorous in her entire life. She spent her days working at a small bookstore, struggling to make ends meet. Luxury was something she only read about in the pages of the novels she sold. So when a neatly dressed courier approached her one evening, holding an elegant envelope with her name on it, she was stunned. "For you, miss," the man said politely before disappearing into the evening crowd. Amelia stared at the envelope. The thick, cream-colored paper was embossed with gold trim, and the calligraphy on the front was exquisite. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "Whitmore Annual Charity Gala. An evening of elegance and celebration awaits you." Her heart pounded. This had to be a mistake. She knew no one in high society, had no connections to the wealthy or elite. Why would she be invited to such an event? A rational part of her told her to throw the invitation away. But a lingering sense of curiosity kept her from doing so. Maybe, just maybe, this was a rare opportunity. A fleeting glimpse into a world she had only dreamed of. With no extravagant gown or designer accessories, Amelia chose the nicest dress she owned, a simple navy blue piece she had found in a thrift store. It wasn't much, but it made her feel elegant in a way that mattered. She styled her long brown hair into soft waves and wore her only pair of modest heels. As she arrived at the grand Whitmore estate, the sight before her took her breath away. The towering gates, adorned with golden embellishments, loomed over her. Beyond them, the estate was alive with twinkling lights, luxury cars, and guests dressed in the finest gowns and tuxedos. Their presence radiated wealth and privilege. Taking a deep breath, Amelia stepped forward, clutching her invitation. Just as she reached the entrance, a security guard blocked her path. "Excuse me, miss," he said, eyeing her with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. "This event is by invitation only." Amelia blinked in confusion. "I know," she said, holding up the envelope. "I was invited." The guard barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "I think you're mistaken. This is a private event for high-profile guests." Her stomach tightened. "No, I'm not mistaken. My name is on the invitation." He smirked. "Look, lady, I don't know how you got that, but we both know you don't belong here. This event isn't for just anyone." Amelia felt heat rise to her face. Whispers reached her ears, from nearby guests who had paused to watch the interaction. Who is she? Probably someone trying to sneak in. She looks so ordinary. Her hands clenched at her sides. She had anticipated feeling out of place, but she hadn't expected to be outright humiliated before she even set foot inside. please. Just check the guest list, she said firmly, trying to keep her voice steady. The guard sighed but reluctantly pulled out a tablet and began scrolling. A tense moment passed. And then his brows furrowed. His eyes flicked between the screen and Amelia before his posture stiffened. "You're on the list," he muttered, sounding both surprised and annoyed. He exhaled sharply and turned to another guard nearby. They exchanged glances before he let out a reluctant sigh. "Wait here." Amelia's heart pounded as he stepped aside to speak into his earpiece. More guests arrived, gliding past her with amused glances and subtle sneers. Every second felt unbearable. Minutes later, the guard returned, his expression unreadable. "You're clear to enter." His tone made it clear that he wasn't happy about it. But Amelia refused to let his attitude shake her. With her chin slightly raised, she stepped forward. The murmurs continued behind her, but she ignored them, focusing instead on what lay ahead. As she entered the grand ballroom, her breath caught. Chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, casting golden light across the polished marble floors. The scent of expensive perfume and champagne lingered in the air. It was more magnificent than anything she had ever seen. But even as she took in the beauty of it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that eyes were still judging her, questioning why she was there. Little did she know, tonight would reveal secrets about her past that would change everything. And soon, those who had looked down on her would come to regret it. Amelia took cautious steps into the grand ballroom, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The moment she entered, she felt out of place. The room was dazzling, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests, each one exuding an effortless grace that she knew she lacked. Gilded mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the grandeur of the event, while a live orchestra played soft, enchanting melodies in the background. She clutched her invitation tightly as she moved forward, feeling unfamiliar nervousness creep up her spine. It wasn't the magnificence of the place that unsettled her, but rather the growing realization that every pair of eyes in the room seemed to be turning toward her. The first whispers started as soon as she stepped onto the marble floor. "Who is she? I've never seen her before. She doesn't belong here." Amelia's heart pounded, but she lifted her chin. She knew she wasn't like them. Her dress, though carefully chosen and elegant in its own way, wasn't a designer brand. She had no glittering diamonds around her neck, no shimmering silk draping her figure. But she was here for a reason, and she wasn't about to let their scrutiny break her. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes passed by, and as Amelia reached for a glass, a woman in an emerald green gown purposefully bumped into her, causing her to stumble slightly. "Oh, my apologies," the woman said with an insincere smile. "I didn't see you there." A chorus of snickers followed. Amelia steadied herself, forcing a small smile in return. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. As she moved deeper into the room, the judgment only intensified. A small group of socialites, their gowns dripping in luxury, watched her with amusement. "Did she sneak in?" one of them whispered. "Maybe she's the help," another giggled. Amelia ignored them, but her hands trembled slightly. She needed to find a quiet corner, somewhere to compose herself. She spotted an unoccupied table near the far end of the ballroom and made her way toward it. Just as she was about to sit, a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice laced with polite disdain. "May I see your invitation?" Amelia blinked. I already showed it at the entrance. Then you won't mind showing it again, he said, extending his hand. By now, the conversation around them had quieted. People turned to watch, their interest piqued by the confrontation. Amelia felt her cheeks flush, but she refused to let them see her falter. She reached into her small purse and pulled out the invitation, handing it to the man. He took a moment to inspect it, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then, without a word, he handed it back to her. Very well, he said stiffly. Enjoy the evening. But the damage was done. The murmurs intensified, and the laughter returned. Quieter now but no less cruel. Amelia felt her pulse quicken, the weight of their judgment heavier than she had anticipated. Before she could take another step, a woman's voice rang out across the room. Oh, how charming! A charity case. The words sent a ripple through the crowd. And then came the laughter, sharp, biting. Amelia turned toward the voice and found herself staring at a strikingly beautiful woman, her blonde hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. Her ice blue eyes gleamed with amusement, and the smirk on her lips was anything but friendly. Tell me, the woman continued, taking a slow sip from her champagne flute. Who exactly invited you? Amelia's grip on her purse tightened. I was invited, she said, her voice steady. By whom? The blonde pressed, stepping closer. Amelia hesitated. The letter had no name, only an elegant signature that she hadn't recognized. Oh, darling, the blonde cooed mockingly. Did you really think you could just walk in here and blend in? Another wave of laughter followed. Amelia's heart pounded, but she refused to let them see her pain. She squared her shoulders, meeting the woman's gaze head-on. I don't need to blend in, she said coolly. I belong here. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The blonde raised an eyebrow, her smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second before she chuckled. How adorable, she mused. Tell me, do you even know whose party this is? Amelia hesitated again. She had read the invitation carefully, but the name of the host had been elusive, written only in an elegant script. The blonde took her silence as an answer. You have no idea? Do you? She turned to the crowd. Can you believe this? She doesn't even know whose event she crashed. More laughter erupted, and Amelia felt her stomach twist. She had never been humiliated like this before. Never felt so small. But before she could respond, a deep, commanding voice cut through the noise. Is there a problem here? The room fell into a hushed silence. The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward. He was older, distinguished, with piercing grey eyes that seemed to see straight through the blonde's facade. His tailored suit and air of authority left no doubt he was someone important. The blonde's confidence faltered. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice suddenly much softer. I asked a question. The man interrupted. His gaze shifted to Amelia. And for the first time that evening, she saw something other than judgment in someone's eyes. Her breath caught. Who was he? And why was he looking at her like that? The blonde quickly recovered, flipping her hair over her shoulder. We were simply concerned, she said smoothly. This girl claims she was invited. But, she was invited, the man said, his voice firm. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. The blonde's mouth opened and closed, speechless for the first time that night. Mr. Whitmore turned to Amelia, his expression unreadable. Come with me. Amelia hesitated, but something in his eyes told her she had no reason to fear. She lifted her chin, ignoring the stunned expressions around her, and followed him toward the grand staircase. As they ascended, whispers filled the air. The people who had mocked her moments ago now watched her with curiosity. Even a hint of apprehension. Who was she? And why was the most powerful man in the room treating her as someone who mattered? Amelia was about to find out. Amelia followed Mr. Whitmore up the grand staircase, her heart hammering in her chest. The murmurs of the crowd faded as they ascended, but she could still feel their eyes burning into her back. Questions swirled in her mind. Why had he defended her? Who was he to intervene so decisively on her behalf? And most importantly, how did he recognize her? At the top of the stairs, he gestured for her to follow him down a dimly lit hallway, away from the opulence of the ballroom. The echoes of the party grew fainter with each step until they reached a set of large double doors. Mr. Whitmore pushed them open, revealing an elegant study lined with bookshelves and adorned with a large, roaring fireplace. "Please," he said, gesturing to a velvet armchair near the fire. "Have a seat." Amelia hesitated but eventually complied, lowering herself onto the plush chair. Mr. Whitmore poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter and handed her one, though she merely cradled it in her hands, too nervous to drink. He took a seat across from her, studying her intently. Finally, he broke the silence. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Amelia frowned, searching his face. There was something familiar about him, a distant memory she couldn't quite grasp. But she shook her head. "No. I'm sorry. I don't." A small, knowing smile crossed his lips. "That's understandable. It's been many years." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Amelia, what do you know about your parents?" The question caught her off guard. "My parents?" she echoed. I lost them when I was very young." Mr. Whitmore nodded, as if he already knew. "And do you remember anything about them? Their lives? What they did?" She shook her head again. "Not much. I grew up in foster care. I was told they passed away in an accident, but no one ever gave me many details." A flicker of sadness crossed his face. He exhaled slowly before speaking. "Your father," he said carefully, "was one of the most brilliant financial minds I've ever known. And your mother? She was a remarkable woman. Strong, kind." Amelia's breath caught. "You knew them?" A solemn nod. "Very well. In fact, your father and I were business partners." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Amelia gripped the edge of her chair, trying to process his words. That's not possible. If my father was your partner, why did I grow up with nothing? Why did no one ever come for me?" Mr. Whitmore's expression darkened. "Because after your parents died, everything they had was stolen." Her heart clenched. "Stolen?" He leaned back, swirling his whiskey. "Your father had built something extraordinary, an investment empire that could have secured your future. But after his death, certain individuals within our company took advantage of the situation. They erased his name, seized his assets, and ensured that you and your mother would never see a penny of it." Amelia's hands tightened around the glass. "Who?" she demanded. "Who did this?" Mr. Whitmore hesitated before answering. "Many people were involved. Some are still in this very house tonight." A chill ran through her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," he said gravely. I failed you once. I won't do it again. He leaned forward, his voice low and firm. Your father trusted me. And I let him down. I was too young, too inexperienced to fight against the board members who conspired against him. But I've spent the last few years gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to make things right. Amelia swallowed hard. And tonight is that moment. Yes, he confirmed. But I need your help. She frowned. My help? What can I do? Mr. Whitmore set his glass down. Tonight, some of the very people responsible for your father's downfall are here. They believe they've buried the past. But if you're willing, we can expose them. A mixture of anger and determination flared in Amelia's chest. The people who had humiliated her downstairs, were they the same ones who had stolen her future? The idea filled her with righteous fury. How? She asked. A small smile played on Mr. Whitmore's lips. Leave that to me. He stood, offering her his hand. Are you ready? Amelia took a deep breath. Then, she placed her hand in his. Yes. Together, they stepped out of the study, ready to change everything. As they descended the grand staircase, all eyes turned toward them. The whispers returned. But this time, there was a new tension in the air. The blonde woman who had humiliated Amelia earlier stiffened, her fingers tightening around her champagne flute. Mr. Whitmore walked confidently into the center of the ballroom. And with a sharp clink of his glass against a spoon, the room fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying across the hall, I have a very important introduction to make. All eyes were now locked on Amelia. She stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. This, Mr. Whitmore declared, is Amelia Sinclair, the rightful heir to the Sinclair fortune. Gasps erupted throughout the crowd. The blonde woman's face paled. The older man who had mocked Amelia earlier nearly dropped his drink. The entire room seemed frozen in shock. Amelia's eyes swept across the stunned faces. For the first time that evening, she felt powerful. These people had judged her, belittled her, never realizing that she was the one thing they feared most, someone who could bring their world crashing down. And she intended to do exactly that. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom remained tense, the weight of Amelia's revelations still pressing on the stunned guests. Though the most corrupt individuals had been exposed, their removal was only the beginning. Amelia now faced an even greater challenge, reclaiming the Sinclair legacy in a world that had conspired to erase her family's name. She turned to Mr. Whitmore, her voice steady. What happens next? He regarded her with a solemn nod. Now, we fight. The legal process will be long and complicated. But with the evidence we have, we can start the proceedings to take back what was stolen. Amelia exhaled. It wasn't going to be easy. The people in this room, those who had mocked her earlier, were still powerful. Some were merely bystanders. But many were complicit in maintaining the false narrative that had erased her father's legacy. From the corner of the ballroom, a sharp voice cut through the murmurs. You think this changes anything? It was Victoria Harrington, the blonde socialite who had sneered at Amelia when she arrived. Though the other corrupt individuals had been escorted out, Victoria had remained, watching the scene unfold with growing irritation. Victoria stepped forward, her arms crossed. You may have caused a scandal, Amelia, but money talks. Influence matters. Do you really believe you can just waltz in here and take control? Amelia met her gaze without flinching. "I don't believe it," she said. "I know it." A few guests gasped, surprised by her confidence. Victoria, however, scoffed. "And what exactly are you going to do? Sue everyone in this room?" She gestured broadly. "These are the elite, darling. They have the best lawyers, the strongest connections." Her eyes narrowed. "You may have exposed a few thieves, but there will always be more. Do you really think you're ready for this world?" A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Some guests had begun to look at Amelia with newfound respect. But others still doubted her ability to wield power in a place where deception was currency. Mr. Whitmore stepped beside her. "She doesn't have to be ready for this world," he said smoothly. "Because this world will soon have to adjust to her." His words carried weight. Whitmore was not just any businessman, he was respected, feared, and known for his ruthless efficiency. If he had chosen to back Amelia, it meant she wasn't just an underdog, she was a rising force to be reckoned with. Victoria faltered for just a moment but recovered quickly. "We'll see about that," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Your father was a great man. But greatness isn't inherited. You'll have to prove yourself." Amelia nodded. "And I will." A hush fell over the room. The challenge had been set. The battle for control wasn't just about money or influence, it was about proving that Amelia Sinclair deserved to reclaim her family's name and legacy. As the tension reached its peak, a man stepped forward from the crowd. He was older, with silver hair and piercing grey eyes, an air of authority surrounding him. "Miss Sinclair," he said, his voice measured, "I was a business partner of your father many years ago. If what you claim is true, then you will need allies to ensure justice is served." He extended a hand. "I am willing to stand by your side." Amelia studied him carefully. She had learned tonight that trust was not something to be given freely. "And why should I believe you?" she asked. The man smiled slightly. "Because I owe your father a debt. One I was never able to repay." His expression grew serious. "You will need people who understand how this world operates. I can help." Mr. Whitmore nodded in approval. Henry Sinclair had many allies before his fall. It seems some have been waiting for the right time to step forward. Amelia considered the offer. She knew that winning this battle would require more than just exposing criminals, it would require strategy, alliances, and playing the very game that had destroyed her father. After a long pause, she extended her hand and shook the man's firmly. "Then let's make sure my father's legacy is restored." A few other guests, sensing the shift in power, stepped forward as well, expressing their support. Some did so out of genuine loyalty to her father, while others likely saw an opportunity. Regardless, Amelia knew she had ignited something that could no longer be ignored. Victoria, realizing she was losing ground, huffed in frustration. "This isn't over," she warned before turning on her heel and stalking away. Mr. Whitmore smirked. "Oh, I certainly hope not," he murmured, watching her leave. As the night wore on, Amelia was approached by more guests. Some seeking forgiveness, others offering alliances. Though exhausted, she held her ground. Tonight had been a victory. But the true battle was only beginning. As the ballroom slowly emptied, Amelia stepped onto the grand balcony, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights stretched endlessly before her, each one representing a possibility, a challenge, a future she had never thought she'd have. Mr. Whitmore joined her. "You handled yourself well tonight," she sighed. "It's not over yet." No, he agreed. But you've made your mark. And that's more than most people in that room have done in a lifetime. She turned to face him. What do you think Victoria and the others will do next? His expression darkened slightly. They'll regroup. They'll strategize. They won't go down without a fight. Amelia nodded. Then we'll be ready. Mr. Whitmore studied her for a moment. Then chuckled. Your father would be proud. Amelia. She smiled. Then I'll make sure to keep making him proud. As she looked back at the city, she knew that the hardest part was still ahead. She had won the first battle. But the war for her family's legacy had just begun. And she was ready for it. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of legal battles, strategic negotiations, and power struggles. Amelia had expected resistance. But the sheer scale of the opposition was staggering. Victoria Harrington and the remaining conspirators had not simply retreated, they had regrouped, using every resource at their disposal to block her path. But Amelia was relentless. With Mr. Whitmore by her side, along with the influential allies who had stepped forward at the gala, she fought back. One by one, the fraudulent transactions that had stolen her father's empire were unraveled. Court orders were filed. Assets were frozen. And powerful figures who once seemed untouchable found themselves facing criminal charges. The media followed the story closely, turning Amelia into an unexpected icon, a young woman who had been cast aside, only to rise and challenge the corrupt elite. But Victoria was not done yet. Late one evening, as Amelia reviewed the latest financial records, Mr. Whitmore entered the room with a grim expression. We have a problem, he said, placing a folder on the table. Amelia opened it and felt her stomach tighten. Inside were documents detailing a last-ditch effort by Victoria to shift assets overseas, effectively hiding the remaining wealth she and her allies had siphoned from the Sinclair estate. She's trying to make sure you can't recover everything, Whitmore explained. If she succeeds, she'll still walk away rich, even if her reputation is in ruins. Amelia clenched her jaw. Then we stop her. The battle came down to one final confrontation, a private boardroom meeting where Victoria and her last remaining allies would attempt to negotiate their way out of trouble. Amelia, armed with irrefutable evidence, was determined to leave no room for escape. The air inside the boardroom was thick with tension as Amelia took her seat across from Victoria. The once arrogant socialite was composed, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Victoria smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. You certainly know how to make an entrance, Amelia. Amelia met her gaze steadily. I'm not here for theatrics, Victoria. I'm here to end this. Victoria leaned back in her chair, exuding confidence. End what? Exactly? You've caused a scandal. Sure. But people like me don't just disappear. Amelia slid a stack of documents across the table. These say otherwise. Financial records, offshore accounts, illegal transactions, you left a trail. Victoria's fingers drummed against the table. And what do you expect me to do about it? You're going to sign over every remaining asset that was stolen from my family. Every last cent. Amelia's voice was firm. In return, I'll ensure the charges against you are reduced. Victoria studied her expression unreadable. And if I refuse, then I make sure the world sees every detail of what you did, Amelia said. And I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life paying for it. The room was silent. Victoria glanced at her allies, but they were already shifting uncomfortably. They knew Amelia had won. With a sigh, Victoria picked up the pen and signed the documents. "You're more ruthless than I gave you credit for." Amelia took the papers, making sure every signature was in place before standing. "I'm not ruthless," she said. "I'm just done letting people like you win." As she walked out of the boardroom, the weight of years of injustice lifted from her shoulders. The headlines the next day confirmed what Amelia had fought for: the Sinclair legacy restored. The stolen wealth had been recovered. The guilty were facing justice. And Amelia Sinclair was no longer the forgotten daughter of a ruined empire, she was its future. Standing in her father's old office, overlooking the city, Amelia felt the weight of everything settle on her shoulders. But this time, it wasn't a burden. It was her responsibility. And she was ready for it. Mr. Whitmore entered, watching her quietly for a moment. "Your father would be proud." Amelia smiled, her heart full. "Then I've done what I set out to do." And with that, she turned to face the future, knowing she had finally claimed what was rightfully hers.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future content. And most importantly, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. What was your favorite part? Is there anything you'd like to see in the next video? Let's chat. See you in the next one.